Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on the Foundation Equipment module. This is a part of our weekly webinar series that we have been running um, where we started actually with our fixed assets module. We've went over service dispatch. We've went over the inventory module as well as the equipment module. And we'll start hitting some of the other additional modules here in the upcoming week. So keep a look on our webinar schedule for upcoming additional module webinars if there are any other modules that you want to take a look at. My name is Dylan Kilpatrick. I am a client sales representative here at Foundation. I've been with the company for 5 years. I've worked on our support team and our implementation team, as well as now on the client sales end of things. I can use my experience in those other departments, especially on the implementation side, to help guide companies into product solutions and additional modules that could benefit tracking on their end. So with today, we're going to go over again the equipment module. The equipment module allows you to track equipment usage as well as also track the equipment maintenance in the system and give you some very good reporting directly in the software that can be very beneficial and create a lot of visibility. Before we get started, I do also like to point out that we will be sending a recording of the webinar out after this. So if there's anybody you would want to pass this webinar along to, or if potentially can't make it the entire webinar, we again will be doing a recording and sending that out. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Foundation screen and we can start talking about the equipment module here. So again, I said there's two pieces to the module. Again, there's the usage portion where we're actually tracking the hours that the equipment is being used, as well as the other side of which that would be the equipment maintenance. So I'll go ahead and touch base on the equipment module usage tracking specifically at first, and that's going to start with actually going into our equipment items. Now we can import these equipment items into the system so that you have them available. You don't have to manually enter those if you're not using the module already. And I'm gonna just go ahead and pull up one of our examples here. So I'm gonna pull up this piece of equipment. You can see when we create the piece of equipment, we can create equipment number and then the description. We can also put in the category, so we can categorize our pieces of equipment for reporting purposes, as well as all of the purchase data. Some of this purchase data would be more beneficial for like the fixed asset side of things for tracking depreciation, which we can do with that module. But within this module, we don't necessarily have to have all of these fields, but if you want to add those for tracking purposes like our manufacturer, serial numbers, make, model, year, whether this is an owned piece of equipment or piece of equipment that you guys are renting, we can do that as well. And I'll just kind of continue moving over on our tabs here. The next tab over is where we are going to put in our job cost rate. So when we use a piece of equipment, not only are we just tracking the hours, we are job costing that piece of equipment out onto our job at whatever rate we enter into the system, whether that be hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, so on and so forth. We can also attach warranty information and coverages in the system as well if you guys want to track that. And then the last piece over here on the right-hand side is going to be the service tab. On this service tab, this is where we can set up automated tracking for maintenance. So if we need to track, let's just say, a routine maintenance or something like that, or anything that you guys would want to be able to track maintenance on and automatically create work orders, what we can actually do is set that up in the system. We can give it a service code, which are completely customized to whatever you guys would need them to be. We can actually track it by miles or by the hours used or even others. And we can track the increments that you guys would want to track those in. So in this piece of equipment here, we are tracking every 5,000 miles. It's just a very general example. And then as you're tracking your meter mileage or your usage hours, it'll actually come in here and then you can generate an eligible service list based off of those setup service codes. And on that service code, we can default in on that maintenance that we're going to be doing specific inventory or even non-inventory items or just comments that we would like to put in the work order if we're generating and sending that out to our mechanics that work internally. After we have our piece of equipment set up, there's a handful of different ways that we can track the usage in the system. We can very easily just go into the software and track the usage onto jobs by entering it manually into the system. We can give it a day, and then we can choose our piece of equipment. We can give it a time, or units. So if I did hourly, I'll go ahead and put in 8 hours. It'll default in the rate that I have set up on the either on the piece of equipment or on the category, and then I can default that onto a job. So let's go ahead and select a job here. I'll go ahead and throw it onto my webinar job, and I'll throw it into a cost code, and then it'll default in the owned equipment cost class as well. So now I can save this. If I wanted to put this information in via an import via CSV, I can use a CSV to import, or a text file, and import this data into the system. Or I can have my employees enter usage through the Foundation mobile app, or even through time cards. So if you wanted to do it via time card, I'll show you here in a second. So if we entered it manually or imported it with the CSV, we're able to go into the system, and then we can post that into the system and track that usage. What it's going to do is it's going to allocate indirect cost onto the job directly based off of how many hours and the job cost rates that you set up. Just to show you what it would look like from a time card perspective, if we're manually entering those time cards into the payroll daily section, we can enter time cards. We just need to make sure we choose a time card that has the equipment piece attached to it. So on here, if I go into add, I can see that I can add the equipment work order. So if our mechanics are going to enter time against a work order, we can do that. Or we can actually have the piece of equipment pop up, and even an eligible service code as well. So if we're just tracking usage, they would put in the equipment. If they were tracking maintenance on that piece of equipment, they can enter it via the time card, or track labor hours to that via the work order number or the service code. So if you have a one-to-one relationship with maybe an operator that is using that piece of equipment all day, you can have that piece of equipment in the usage hours be attached onto the time card. So a handful of different ways to get the usage into the system. Once we track the usage in the system, what we're actually going to be able to do is see that on our job cost reports now. It's going to give us more accurate job costing as we go through, and actually be able to see how often we were using a piece of equipment and what it was job costed at. So if I go ahead and just hit report here, and I find that job that I track that equipment to, I should be able to see on that webinar job here that I had equipment there. If I drill down into the current cost for that job, I'll actually be able to see the equipment cost located on that piece of equipment, how many hours in total were used, and the total dollar amounts that were costed out into that job in the equipment section as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip over, and we're going to talk about maintenance a little bit, and not just the usage, so how we actually would be able to track our maintenance in the software. So usually maintenance is going to start with just tracking meters and our meter and our mileage in the system, and entering that into the software. We can enter that manually in here just by coming in and putting in our default line items, choosing a piece of equipment, and then putting in the hours available on here. So I'll just go ahead and put in my odometer reading actually. We can also import this via CSV as well. If you have a CSV file that has the equipment number, the date, the hours, the odometer, and other, just those 5 columns, if you track your meter and your mileages through a different software and need to import that into the system, we can do that as well. So I can go ahead and save that in here, and I can go ahead and post that tracking, so that if we set up kind of any automated maintenance that needs to come in, we can actually use those entries to automate that and check our work order area. So that's where we're going to be able to come down here and go to like an eligible service list. And let's see if I actually have anything eligible. I don't. So that is good. If I did have something eligible, I would see the equipment here along with the service code, the date that it was last serviced, and what the current trigger is. And you can actually assign that out and generate the work orders from the eligible service list. I'd be able to generate those work orders and then create and print those out in the system. I'll go ahead and pull up a previous one that I was on that piece of equipment. You can see this was automated by miles available. So on here, this is where we would actually be able to come in and put in the details for the work order. So it'll have the eligible service code, and then all of the details that we have built on the equipment maintenance account would then show up here. So any items, if you guys have our inventory module, would be listed in here. It's specific how many quantities of those items we need and what the extended unit cost is. any non-inventory items that were defaulted in, as well as the employee we want to assign this to and the estimated hours for that fix should be. So we can add all of those line items. We'll have a summary tab here, and we can actually save this and then print out our work orders for completion on this end. And we can default in a work order template for you and get that adjusted. But then what we would have here is what the service code is, and then the work order. That one we were on specifically would be this one, where we can see our items, any non-inventory items, and then also the service code and employee that this was scheduled for. They would complete that work order. You guys could then come in and complete that work order in the software and fill out all of the necessary details for that. And again, we can put in our completed date, and we can mark that as closed. And then we can go ahead and save that in the system. It's going to ask me for some more information on here, but we can complete that work order in the software and then track against it as needed. If we had to order parts or track labor against it, again, we can go back into the payroll module and we can track mechanic labor hours that are attached to a specific work order. We can actually also attach in an accounts payable invoice or any kind of cost details on the AP side if we needed to order parts or anything of that nature. So on here, what we would actually be able to do is choose our vendor, and then we would be able to choose our job. On this one, if it's going to be an indirect cost and not tied to any specific job, we would default in our indirect job, which is equipment and service repair. And we would put in an invoice number that it was attached to, a date, a transaction date, and then also a total. And then down here at the very bottom, this is all looking like normal. Anybody that's familiar with AP invoice entry, this is all normal up until this point, besides the job number up there. We haven't really seen anything abnormal on that end, but we would be able to choose our expense account, which would be in the indirect area. So I would need like my indirect equipment expense account. I would choose my amounts. I would choose the job that would pull into the system. Again, that's going to be equipment service repair, my cost code, my cost class. And then when I scroll over here to the right-hand side, because we have that associated there, we can actually come into the system, we can attach it onto a specific work order, and it'll default in the piece of equipment or the service code. If we didn't have a specific work order that we were attaching, we can just choose the piece of equipment and the service code attached with it. Does not necessarily have to go through a work order if you guys don't want to use the work order system in the software. So we would be able to track this detail in here, save and post, and list this in the software. And then it would feed back into your equipment module as a cost associated with that piece of equipment. So what that's going to do is, after we've entered these items in various methods, it's going to allow us to be able to report on profit and even usage for our pieces of equipment. So if I pull this report here, I will get all of my pieces of equipment listed out down here, as well as how many hours they've been used for a specific period. I have mine set for the first quarter, and my average hourly job costing rate and my usage dollars here. And then I'll be able to compare that with my service hours that were in the system, as well as any other service expenses and overhead expenses. Even fuel tracking, if you guys track fuel in the system and you guys have a need to track fuel, we can do that as well. And it'll give you a cost per hour on this end. And I can tell that some of my equipment items need to be increased in terms of what their actual job costing rates are. For this piece of equipment number 8 here, I can see that my job cost rate is set to 50, but in this quarter, it cost me $220 an hour to maintain that piece of equipment. So in that case, we would use this report on a quarter by quarter or month by month basis to potentially adjust our usage cost or our usage job costing rate on our pieces of equipment, so that we can actually job cost more effectively as to what it's actually costing. So it's going to allow you nice reporting. It's going to give you the ability to allocate those job cost hours and that job cost amount onto our jobs straight through the software here. And that is kind of this high level overview of the equipment module. I mean, we try not to get too in depth on everything within these webinars, but if you guys did have any follow-up questions, you can throw them in the questions box at this time. And then I'll also throw up my contact information here in a moment for you guys to be able to email me if you do have any questions, or even get follow-up information on things like pricing or anything of that nature. Whilst the questions are rolling in, again, I'm going to throw my contact information up here on the screen. And I just again, want to let you guys know that if you have any questions on pricing or anything of that nature, to shoot me an email. As a part of this webinar series that we've been doing, if you would like to add this module or any of the other modules that we've covered this month, we are offering a 10% off in the month of April for the equipment module and also the inventory module as well. So again, just going to give some time for anybody to throw in any questions in the chat. And I am not seeing too many things rolling through here. I actually don't see any questions, which is either good or bad thing. So again, if you guys have any specific questions that you'd like to just direct towards me and not in the chat, my contact information is down here at the bottom. You can give me a call at the 800 number, as well as just shooting me an email at dkilpatrick@foundationsoft.com as well. Since I don't see any questions, I'll go ahead and just jump off and look forward to hearing from you guys via email to follow up. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day and a great weekend.